Hello, my name is Jason Scribner, and I'm a security analyst here to give you a brief use case scenario on how the log4j vulnerability can affect a victim for this library shell. I'm not here to actually explain the technical capabilities and the know-how of how the log4j package within Java is actually vulnerable. There are many more videos that can give a better description of how that works, and including a Black Hat conference video back in 2016 that actually explains how this vulnerability works and why it was such a big deal, especially back then. Right now, I just want to give a brief use case scenario on how you can actually open up a reverse shell utilizing the JNDI attack with log4j. So let's go ahead and get that started. As you can see on my screen, this website from the Swiss Government Computer Emergency Response Team has provided a quick debrief on how the log4j JNDI attack can actually work. Some of you might have been looking into how Twitter, some of the more followers for hackers and similar security analysts have started changing their usernames to include some form of JSON code that actually shows how this attack can work. Basically, what this would utilize is, as you can see on the screen, is that if the victim server actually has a log4j vulnerability on it, then those brackets can be stripped and that JNDI call can be followed utilizing privileged credentials in order to do a callback, in this case to an LDAP server. And that LDAP server can redirect the server to download possible malicious files, which we will show you in this current example. So on my screen, I'm utilizing a box from TryHackMe.com. They have provided a useful lab to actually show you a use case scenario, and I'll go over how pretty much ridiculously easy this is to actually launch. So let's go ahead and get everything cleared out here real quick. So the first thing you want to do in order to actually make a victim vulnerable is that you actually have to do nmap scan against a possible victim server, and you need to identify whether or not they're running Apache. Log4j specifically runs on Apache, so that way you want to kind of like identify the vulnerabilities. So I went ahead and did that already. So let's go to this one right here. I already know it's in a high port range, so we're just going to go ahead and repeat this real quick at a relatively fast scan, and we can see right here there's an open port on 8983. If we actually go there with a browser, I'll bring this up real quick. 10, bring up the vulnerable IP address real quick. Okay. 983. And we're taken to a program called Solar, which is used for numerous products if it's been used on a server. And what we're specifically looking for is log4j, and we can see that's actually being used as a configuration file for logs. On the lab itself, it actually just says to go ahead and download some of those logs, which I went ahead and already did. And we can see in some of these logs right here that it's doing a callback to a specific path within the server. And right here shows brackets, which utilize most of the time JSON requirements. These parameters can actually be abused. So what we're going to do here is that we're actually going to go to this location on our browser and see what's there. So let's go ahead and move admin/course. And we can see that it accepts JSON, raw data, and headers. And we can also see there's curly brackets right here as well. So in a sense, this kind of tells us that this possibly can be exposed to the log4j vulnerability, specifically for attacking using JNDI calls. Real quickly, for anybody who doesn't know, log4j actually stands for Java Naming and Directory Interface. It's specifically used for applications in Java to provide naming and directory services. So it's highly used, just like log4j is as well. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. So there's a couple things that needs to happen in order for the JNDI call to actually work with LDAP. You need an LDAP server and you need an HTTP server, which we're going to go ahead and launch on both of them on this machine right here that we're playing with. So first thing first is we're actually going to make sure that we have a service that can actually provide a LDAP server. I'm using something called MarshallSec. This is provided on GitHub. It's been around for a while. They have since updated it since the new vulnerability that came out. If you want to learn about JNDI injection. What this specific library does is that it actually utilizes the ability to change JNDI calls into code execution using LDAP. So we're going to go ahead and launch that on our attack server real quick. Looks like it already shows that. As you can see, I'm using Java to call in a specific snapshot to run an LDAP server. On this LDAP reference, what I'm utilizing is that it's going to call back to the same machine that this LDAP server is running on port 8000, which is the default port that usually what happens when you run an HTTP server, especially in Python. So it's going to actually reference this exploit file. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. Now it's listening on port 1389, which is a standard LDAP server. At the same time, you're supposed to build a Java library file in order for it to actually execute. I already went ahead and did that real quick. To give you an example of how it looks like, it's a very simple Java class exploit for getting a runtime. You can see in the runtime it shows netcat, and it's calling specifically a bash back onto the same server that we're hosting both the HTTP and the LDAP services. So we're going to go ahead and launch this netcat real quick so that way it's listening. LDAP quad 9, and now it's listening. And we also have this exploit Java library file ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and exit that out. Usually when you build Java code, you actually want to execute it as well as it shows here. Already went ahead and did that. As you can see, we have a file here that says exploit.class. So this will be called upon once there's a reference from this LDAP server to my web server. Now, next thing we got to do is launch a web server. So we're going to go ahead and do that actually on this one real quick. We're also going to clear this out real quick because we actually have to use that for a different method. So let's go ahead and do Python 3-m http.service, I believe. Oops, I don't know how to spell. Service. 1 second. Server. There we go. So now I have a default HTTP server listening on port 8000. As this will go, if I do the proper exploit correctly and I do the actual JNDI call to my LDAP server, it should hit this LDAP service right here first. This will call back onto this HTTP server, which is also running in the same directory where my exploit class is. And that exploit class will execute a runtime that will call back an NCAT with bash back to this reverse shell. Let's go ahead and see if that works. So in order to actually make this work, we're actually going to use curl. So what we're going to do is we're going to utilize the address that we have for it. Oops. 69 port 8983. Okay. And then we're going to, oh, that's right, we're going to utilize the exact location that we just saw in our browser. Of course. Okay, so this is where the JSON brackets are accepted, and we could possibly actually utilize this to exploit code. So we're going to go ahead and actually identify a variable in JSON. It doesn't matter what it's called, but we're going to use foo, which is what the example lab shows. And we're going to say this equals the code that we're going to execute. Now the code looks a little bit differently because we're utilizing curl. It's going over HTTP, so we don't want the curly brackets to be indicated something else, so we're actually going to escape them out so that way they're still treated as curly brackets. So let's go ahead and escape them out. And then we're going to go JNDI colon LDAP colon / and you have to make sure you actually use these double slashes. It's very similar to how HTTP works. It's just different protocols. So same concept, if that makes it help to remember that you have to add those in. 192.197. And we're going to go over the same LDAP port, which is 1389. And then we're actually going to state we're going to try to utilize the exploit class that's in there. And then we're going to do one more escape. Let's see here, make sure all that's correct. All right. Now, if all of it has worked well and I actually set this up correctly, once I hit enter on this curl, it should hit the LDAP server, then the HTTP server, and then finally back to netcat that's being reverse hosted on the same machine, and I should have a reverse shell into the victim's computer, or server in this case. So let's go ahead and see if that works. And there we go. So we have send LDAP reference result for exploit redirecting to exploit.class. HTTP server gets that request. We have it in the same directory, so it launches it, and now we have a connection for a reverse shell. Let's see who we are. We are Solar, which is possibly the service account, and we're going to go ahead and do a sudo -l to see how many commands we can run, and it shows we can run all commands. So as you can see, this is a huge vulnerability if this was ever to be allowed. So this is just a quick rundown, a quick example. I highly recommend that you do your own research on it and to understand how bad this exploit can actually be. And if you want, I would suggest utilizing this lab as well. This lab is called Solar on TryHackMe.com. It's actually by John Hammond, who's a very, very infamous YouTuber who does a lot of hacking and instructional videos. So he's also great to check out. And that's all I have for today. Bye.